start with prehistoric images of women. I will begin to move through the history of art with women artists. There is more information that I could possibly encompass today. So we're sort of like looking forward to part two. And part two would be exclusively artists of the 20th century who just happen to be women. So hopefully that will develop down the line. I'd also like to start by reading a poem, which is really almost more of a prayer that was written by May Sarton. The title is The Invocation to Kali. Kali is the Hindu goddess of creation and destruction. It is time for the invocation. Kali, be with us. Violence, destruction, receive our homage. Help us to bring darkness into the light, to lift out the pain, the anger, where it can be seen for what it is. The balance wheel for our vulnerable, aching love. Put the wild hunger where it belongs, within the act of creation. Crude power that forges a balance between hate and love. Help us to be that always hopeful gardeners of the spirit who know that without darkness, nothing comes to birth, as without light, nothing flowers. Bear the roots in mind, you, the dark one, Kali, awesome power. 30,000 BC, there appeared this particular figure. It is referred to as the Venus of Willendorf. Obviously, 30,000 BC, it was not called that. Venus, of course, being the goddess of love, and Willendorf, the location in Austria where it was found. As you can see in the case, it is only approximately 4 inches tall. So it is very much like an amulet. It can be carried easily from location to location. This image of the woman is presented when we start at the top as there is no description of the face, so the result is it is anonymous. It is not a woman, it is all women. She has pronounced breasts, pronounced hips, and an accurately described vulva. So what we are looking at is obviously a fertility goddess. There are between 150 and 200 objects such as these that have been found thus far. I'm sure more will be located in time. And they have also been found in situ, that is in location. So we know from other primal cultures that we're familiar with is that when a young girl is approaching her menses, she is removed from the tribe with the village elders. She is separated. She has her first menses. She leaves the tribe as a girl and returns as a woman, a transformation. Now, coupled with that as well was the early recognition that women on a continuing basis bled and they did not die. That is something which is miraculous. It was then, it is now. If a man went out to hunt and he was gored by a bison, that's it. No paramedics, no EMT. But that a woman on a continuing basis would bleed and not die becomes a mystery of life unto today. And that is what we see here in this particular Venus figure. As you can see, in her right hand, she holds a horn. It is the horn of a bull, and on it are 13 marks, which are not only the 13 cycles of the moon, but also the 13 menses cycles during the year which a woman experiences. Coupled with that as well, her left hand is placed on her uterus. So again, we are drawing together that aspect of birth, fertility, life force, the earth goddess, the one who brings forth life itself to us. And that concept is continuous through prehistory and spreads throughout the continent of Europe and Asia. The goddess image appears in almost every possible culture and situation that you can name. Here, for instance, we have 2 images from Bulgaria. Notice particularly the one on the left, this large, rotund, almost egg form. It is full, it is fertile, it is bursting with life and with energy. And we continue to see that kind of imagery brought forward in time. Here, for instance, on the left, we have an image from Romania. And although the abstraction may vary somewhat, or stylistically vary somewhat from piece to piece, the initial thrust and argument is very much the same. Large breasts, large hips, a described vulva to again reaffirm the aspect of birth and fertility. And here, even more so on the right, an abstraction where on the body of the woman is placed a labyrinth which winds in, okay? At the bottom there is a door as an opening, and the meander as well signifies the aspect of life. So life flows, blood flows. We again have that aspect of fertility and productivity. Here, for instance, two images done in clay from Romania. And notice here this very early image of mother and child. Picasso in the 20th century said that mother and child, Madonna and child, was essentially the same image. And in many respects that is true, because this image of a mother nursing an infant obviously moves forward historically not only as a powerful image, but obviously as well as a biological necessity. Here, for instance, on the right, we have the, and I always mispronounce it, the Parzardzik, Romanian fertility goddess. She is sitting on a throne. She is enthroned. You will notice that on her vulva here we have the unwinding path of consciousness. Okay, her hips are very full, and she is pregnant with life and fertility. And in some respects, it points to the woman as a cornucopia, as an abundance, as a provider. And of course, this relationship is drawn to the earth. The earth is, in fact, our mother. We still refer to it as that, as she. And she is the one who provides us with all of our necessities. Here, for instance, when we move into the Sumerian Empire, on the left, our goddess stands, excuse me, originally it was a fountain. The water obviously would flow from the vessel in the very center. As you can see, it is reinforced by the incised lines down the vertical aspect of the image, as well as notice the fish within. So again, addressing the aspect of abundance and life. And here, for instance, on the right, what is thought to be the goddess Inayana, also from Samaria. Notice that she grabs her breasts. It is as if she is lactating to provide us once again with nurturance. And again, the large hips which address themselves to fertility. The image of the goddess, of course, is brought forward into Egyptian civilization and culture, as we can see here in Isis. Isis, of course, and Osiris are the god and goddess, excuse me, within the myth/religion of Egypt. And they were not only husband and wife, they were also brother and sister, and brought forth children. And here on the right, we see Isis again nurturing a child. Excuse me. And she is crowned with the horns and the sun, again making a relationship to life itself. The horns relate to Hathor, the cow goddess. Again, the female cow obviously is the one that provides for the comfort, protection, and nurturance of an individual child. And here, for instance, on the left and the right, we have two images from India. One obviously much earlier, where it is more primitive or primal in orientation. This one, of course, is attached to an agricultural goddess. You will notice you will notice the flowers that are placed above and over and in her hair. And here, of course, obviously to the right, we have one of those very famous images presented to us as well. As we come to the American continent and also to Central America, on the left, as you can see, the double serpent, excuse me, is thought to be, thank you, is thought to be, again, symbolic of the goddess. and or her son, okay? And here to the right, we have the goddess in the process of giving birth. This is actually on the right one of the few examples we have in the history of art showing a woman actually in the process of that experience. And here, when we return to Tibet and Nepal, we are presented with the image of Tara. On the left, for instance, she is holding, the lotus flower of wisdom. And as I'm moving through here, okay, and coming to this image from Africa, which again is a female goddess fertility figure, and here on the right, an image from the Admiralty Islands. And this one, as I have moved through, by the way, I haven't really been accurate, or I shouldn't say accurate, I haven't kept up with, as I move through the images, I'm also moving through time. Okay, 13th, 14th, 16th, 17th century. Okay, and my reason for backing up is that because when I come to this particular slide of the Admiralty Islands, okay, this was produced in the 19th century. Okay, and it was referred to as the first ancestor, okay? Not the second, but the first, okay? Which is very important in terms of concept, okay? In the sense of the first is obviously the one who is going to give birth and bring it forward. And my reason for like shooting through these slides rather rapidly is to share with you that the concept and the idea of the goddess is within every culture, within every civilization, in various forms and in various ways, okay? It also is brought forward within the Greeks. On the right, for instance, we have the snake goddesses from Crete. And interestingly enough, there are not, and there never have been, snakes on Crete. And so the image of the snake has been imported. And of course, the image of the snake is, the image moves like water, it spits fire, and on an annual basis, it sheds its skin, and so becomes a symbol of rebirth. But as the Greeks, of course, developed their thought, their theories, their ideas, and their mythology, one of the many goddesses that develops is Athena, who we see here. She is the goddess of wisdom. She is also a warrior goddess. And in this aspect, it is more of a protectress as opposed to that of being an aggressor. And when we move from the Greeks into the Romans, the Romans, of course, adapt and take the Greek mythologies, the Greek gods and goddesses, and adapt them to their own uses and meanings. And this small Athena figure was produced during the Roman figure, and interestingly enough, as sort of an aside and Jeopardy question, this piece happened to belong in the collection of Sigmund Freud. But I introduce this particular sculpture here because when we come to the Roman period, in terms of Western history, we begin to get a shift and a change. And we begin to get a reduction and concept in relationship to the female. And that is the reason for including this particular slide. The Romans essentially developed a culture which in Latin is referred to as pater familias, that is, the father family. It was a patriarchy. It was not a matriarchy. You know, women did not have many rights. And that is true of the Greeks as well. They couldn't vote. They couldn't divorce their husbands. They couldn't do much of anything. They were certainly objects and chattels in many respects. And just as we have the rise and then the fall of the Roman Empire, okay, thus we also have the rise of Christianity. And with the development of Christianity, the woman or the female gets pushed to the side. Christianity is based on a trinity of Father and Son and Holy Ghost. So we have male and male. And although gender is not associated with the Holy Ghost, we know that the Holy Ghost is the one that impregnated the Virgin Mary. So thus, it must be male as well. And so it becomes a dominating force in Western civilization as we move forward in time. And a hierarchy develops, and of course, eventually we settle into the Middle Ages. Okay? In the 11th century, suddenly, Europe falls in love with the Virgin Mary. And I think one of the reasons for that is that, as I mentioned, it had been a dominating male-oriented religion. And most mythology/religions always deal with the aspect of the dualism. Up, down, left, right, here, there, male, female. The two make one. And obviously that is one of the reasons for all the goddess images that you saw before, to balance out within a tribe, a culture, a civilization, both sides of the coin. And so, as I mentioned, Europe falls in love with the Virgin Mary and gives rise to the development of the great Gothic cathedrals. Here, for instance, Notre Dame, located in Paris. Notre Dame is Our Lady. And all the Gothic cathedrals are Notre Dame, although we refer to them now as Chartres, Reims, Bourges, wherever they happen to be located. And that, of course, is obviously the inclusion of this stained glass window from Chartres. As you can see, central to the image is the Virgin Mary. She is enthroned. On her lap is sitting the Christ child, and she is crowned. She is the Queen of Heaven. And with that, okay, we also begin to have the introduction of women artists. Okay. Now, obviously, during the Middle Ages, all artists were anonymous. The artist was considered very much like a craftsperson and not much more than that, just like the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. Okay, and they were willing to work under those conditions. And I also, by the way, don't wish to imply that all of the previous examples you have seen were executed by men. I mean, if I go back to the very first slide of the Venus of Willendorf, what makes us think that a man produced that particular piece of sculpture? If it was for the use of women within a women's ritual or rite, why would not a woman have produced it? Obviously, we don't know the answer to that. But it certainly is highly possible. But here I have a few examples to show you from the Middle Ages. As you can see here, these are illustrations from illuminated manuscripts, which point to the fact that women, in fact, were working artists. As you can see here to the left, a woman who is producing a piece of sculpture, and here to the right, obviously, a woman who is engaged in portraiture. As well, to the left, notice this woman who is painting, and in the background, interestingly enough, there is a young man who is the apprentice. He is the one who is in the process of grinding the colors, excuse me, that she will use within her painting. Or here again, another example, again, to reaffirm the aspect. So, these illustrations in manuscripts did not come about just simply from the imagination. Obviously, they were based upon, based upon actual experience and knowledge that women were enjoying some sort of artistic activity. And when we come to the 15th century at this particular point in time, in 1998, one of the earliest women to really become renowned and to appear in art history is Sofonisba Anguissola. She was born in Cremona, and she was the oldest of 5 sisters and 1 brother. As is typical as we begin to move through from here on forward, up until I would say the 20th century, since women at this time, of course, did not have many, if at any, rights at all, okay? The reason that women would become painters is they had a quote-unquote liberated father, someone who felt that his daughters should have the same education as his sons. And as a matter of fact, the 5 sisters all became painters, and the boy, who was the last, did not, which is sort of interesting. So, Almircare Anguissola, the father, helped to train and educate his daughter in the ways of painting. And you can see in this early portrait of her sister, Lucretia, who sits with this lapdog. It is a very straightforward, a very honest portrait, obviously, highly well accomplished. Through a series of events, she eventually makes her way to the court of King Philip II in Spain and becomes the court painter. She produces images of religious, mythological subject, but one of the images that captivated many people are these, which are self-portraits. Okay. Perhaps you can see Sophonisba Anguissola, 1554. One of the aspects of these self-portraits, which I think are charming and very delightful, and I think as well, one of the aspects that's slightly different from a male portrait is they seem a little more intimate, a little more open, we have perhaps a little more access to them, okay? Not a sense of distancing, if you will. But these self-portraits were very popular, along with her other paintings. She married, and when she married, the king and queen provided her with a dowry, which speaks well of her skill and reputation. And she and her husband left Spain for Italy. And this is by her sister, Lucretia Anguissola. It is of a doctor in Cremona. You notice that his staff and around it is a snake, which of course is a symbol of the caduceus, which of course points to his medical situation. Again, a highly accomplished, very telling kind of portrait of this individual. Okay, this brings us to Lavinia Fontana, again here in the 16th century. And you will notice one of the differences about Lavinia Fontana's work is that it is highly detailed, as you can see within the close-up here on the right. Again, a commissioned portrait where she sits with her dog looking out at us again. And what is the aspect of these kinds of portraits? I mean, this is the kind of portrait that we would today probably use with a photograph or with a camera, as opposed to sitting and posing for the image. Here, for instance, as two of her religious subjects. On the right, for instance, the Holy Family with Saint John and Saint Elizabeth. And here, for instance, Noli me tangere, where Christ has risen from the tomb, and Mary Magdalene approaches him and he says, Noli me tangere, do not touch me, go and tell the disciples that I have arisen. Again, it's sort of an interesting thing in relationship to Christianity, because it had been said that the first person to see Christ upon his rebirth and upon being reborn would be the leader of the church. But obviously it was not a woman, because it evolves into a male-oriented situation. The other aspect as well is one of the things that happens with Christianity is that it begins to overlay a lot of pagan concepts and ideas. In relationship, I'll give you one very simple example, okay? The aspect of the woman being tied into the moon, okay? As you know, the moon comes up and it dies and disappears, and then it is reborn, okay? And that takes us back to the bison image. And when the moon dies, it disappears for 3 days, okay? And when Christ died, he died for 3 days, and then he reappears. So in a way, it's sort of like overlaying the male over the female, masking that concept, that idea, and that symbolism in many respects. okay? Here we have a self-portrait, unfortunately in black and white. Obviously the original is in color, and it's also a tando. And we have this image of Lavinia Fontana turned, looking out at us. Notice that she has a brush in her hand, so she is showing us that she is an active working artist as opposed to a complacent participant in life. When we move to the north, we come to Katharina von Hessen, as you can see by her signature in the upper right. And of course, the attitude is different here. I mean, the North at this juncture in time in the 16th century is very different from Italy in the 16th century. You'll notice that the color is darker. There is a dark richness, and it's not the best slide, obviously, by the way, obviously. In this particular image, notice that this young woman looks away from us. We are not engaged by her in terms of her look. But when we return to the south, we come to a woman by the name of Artemisia Gentileschi. And her father as well felt that his daughters, should be educated equal to that of men. She is known for a series of paintings about Holofernes and Judith. And the story, of course, goes that Holofernes, the Persian general, is coming to attack her Jewish village. So one night she gets all gussied up, and she gets her hand servants and makes her way through the enemy lines. And then she takes a shine to Holofernes. Okay? And they have some wine, and they have some food, and Holofernes has some more wine. And at the precise moment, she grabs his sword and decapitates him. And here, the blood splots and flies. Of course, we've entered here the Baroque period, a time of drama, theatrical presentation of an image, a moment held, the light falls down, the blood spurts, and they are very actively engaged. I mean, you know, there's no squeamishness here. Some people have made the I think they sort of stretched the point. When she was in Rome with her father, he had gotten her an instructor, a gentleman by the name of Tassi. And in his process of instructing her, he raped her. She accused him of rape. He denied it. It went to court. Finally, she was tortured with thumb screws because, of course, they could not possibly believe a woman. Eventually, it was proven that she was, in fact, right, although Tassi only spent about a month in jail. It's sort of, again, another sort of examination or example, if I should say, of the powerlessness of women in the Western world. Here, for instance, on the right, as you can see, a tisket, a tasket, Holofernes' head in a basket. They are about to leave and move off to go back to her hometown. Here, for instance, as you can see, again, their attention is drawn from the outside of the canvas. They are doing a little takeout here as they wrap up the head. Again, this dramatic use of light, which is so typical of the Baroque period, a moment held. Notice when I say that the Baroque is theatrical, notice that, for instance, in the upper right-hand corner, it's almost as if the curtain has been pulled back to reveal this scene and this drama that is taking place in front of us, okay? And here we have a self-portrait of, Artemisia Gentileschi, and the slide is somewhat dark, but she has here a palette in her hand, and as you can see, the brush is in the upper corner. She is actively engaged in the painting, which is off of the outside of the bounds of our rectangle, but she is completely engrossed, and we are seeing here a working woman. We're not seeing a passive individual. We are seeing here a working artist who happens, as we say, to be a woman. Here, for instance, on the left, we have an image by Elizabeth Sirani, and the subject here is that of Portia, and her husband felt that she could not keep a secret, So, as you can see, she takes this collection of needles and she stabs her leg to show that she can withstand the pain. And how interesting that is. I mean, it really demonstrates a strong dichotomy. I mean, the whole idea is in the background. For instance, we have men talking, and the whole idea is a man gives his word, and that is his bond. But here in the foreground, we have a woman who has to stab her leg and withstand physical pain, if you will, in order that her husband will share his secrets with her. One of the other interesting things about Sarani as well is that she really worked under the spell or the umbrella of her father, if you will. And she worked very rapidly, and people could not believe that she could paint as well as she could and as rapidly as she could. So around 16, I'm not sure the exact date, 1654, somewhere in there, okay? They got an easel, they got a canvas, they set it up in a public place, they invited everybody in, and someone sat down and she painted her portrait in front of a public audience and accomplished it within that time period just to prove that she did have the skill, the ability, and was able to render the image that quickly. Here, as we move, whoops, hit the wrong one. As we move into Holland in the 17th century, a time of Rembrandt and Frans Hals, painters were selecting specialties. If you wanted a landscape, you went here. If you wanted a still life, you went here. If you wanted a genre scene, you went here. And one of the painters who developed was Rachel Ruysch. She married. She had 10 children. She was a rather busy woman. Interestingly enough, her husband was also a painter, and because her paintings were selling and doing better than his, he became her agent. Again, so every once in a while you have this quote-unquote liberated man kind of slide in, if you will. You can see in these wonderful flower still lifes the other aspect of this 17th century microcosm, macrocosm interest in the world at large. We get these highly lush, detailed flower paintings with poppies and carnations and hollyhocks. And they are filled as well with small information like shells and butterflies and insects. Occasionally you can pick those up in the details. Notice, for instance, at the top here, whoops, a ladybug. And this kind of detailed information relates to, again, that sort of philosophical outlook of the microcosm and the macrocosm. Here again, a very lush still life, a detail on the right, peonies and tulips, a great, as the Italians say, a great abbondanza, you know, this lush, rich, and it really speaks of the world, you know, that this is Eden, this is paradise, this is lush, this is rich, you know, it really is fabulous. And off to the side we have the pomegranate, and the pomegranate has for centuries been symbolic of fertility, because when you open up, there are the enormous amount of seeds that spill out and into life. Or here, for instance, as well, Rachel Ruysch, again, excuse me, again with the full painting and the detail to the left, here moving away from exclusively flowers into images of peaches, grapes, plums. Notice in the foreground, as you can see in the detail, we have eggs, lizards, snails, caterpillars, butterflies, moss. Again, that aspect of this rich, incredible world that we live in. And when we move back to the south, we come to a Spanish sculptress by the name of Luisa Ignacia Roldan. And obviously, you know, her work is obviously not that popular today. I mean, it's so rich and lush and fussy, perhaps, to our eye in the 20th century. But one of the important aspects is that where her influence comes is not only, by the way, that this is a very fine piece of sculpture, okay, but in addition, she introduces small terracotta polychromed sculpture. okay? In a way, sort of introducing a new form into the history of art, which, again, once you introduce that idea, you get this sense of evolution and process growing. And so here we can see the death of Mary Magdalene, rich and lush, highly detailed. This is not the best slide, but one that I got out of a textbook, obviously, of the image of Christ, almost a full-blown life-size figure. It as well would be polychromed. Or here, for instance, a detail from this particular sculpture, again by Luisa Ignacia Roldan, of the angel Gabriel. And unfortunately, the slides are the best I can get from a book, but give us a sense of the individual and the power of her imagery, okay? And to jump into the 20th century, and the reason I introduced these images is, as well, around, I'm not sure the exact date, to be honest with you, I think it was the late 50s, a woman by the name of Betty Friedan wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique. When that book was published, it opened the door and suddenly began to let in a lot of fresh air about the role of women, who they were, what they were. And that helped to begin and to establish the women's liberation movement. Obviously, one of the questions that came out of that is why aren't there any great women artists? Okay, well, first of all, the answer to that is yes, there are. But in addition to that, okay, one of the books that came from that was a writer by the name of Germaine Greer, who wrote a very lengthy book investigating all the historical and social aspects of that idea. The book is called The Obstacle Race. And that, of course, then that's another door that opened, and then there were more questions about, well, where are they? Where are these women, okay? And so, you know, women artists in the 20th century began to look for role models, okay? And that's why I introduced this here. One of the painters and sculptors, she's also produces sculpture now, is a woman by the name of Audrey Flack. And she was in Spain. And it was almost by accident that she came upon the work of Luisa Ignacia Roldan, okay? And it became a model for her. And so you can sort of see that relationship in these two paintings by her, done in the 1970s. Okay, they have obviously they're both Madonnas. I mean, there's no question of that. Okay, two different subjects. They also are very Spanish in orientation. You know, the kind of detailing, the kind of richness, the kind of color. Okay, but of course she is using a photorealist style / technique in developing and presenting her image here. Okay, which is something that she explored for a period of time. Okay, as well here, for instance, we have one of her paintings which is referred to as a vanitas painting. That is, vanity, vanity, all is vanity, and pointing to the fleetness of life. And so the painting here is loaded, if you will, with symbolism. You will notice that for instance, the candle, which can blow out. I mean, this painting was done long before Elton John came up with Blowing in the Wind, okay? You will notice that there are images of femininity, the pear and the peach and the cut orange, again, located within a feminist aspect. She includes herself within, I believe it's herself, or it may be her mother and father, as youngsters in the photograph. And as well, interestingly enough, she uses Marilyn Monroe, this life that people talk about as being fleeting. And in addition, to make this sort of metaphorical, okay, is that what happens, Marilyn Monroe is a screen goddess, right? And that's one of the things that's a misinterpretation, I think, within the 20th century, okay? The idea of the goddess is a very deep, very powerful, very rich concept, image, and feeling, okay? And we get so attuned to like the silver screen, okay? The goddess on the silver screen, which is a very fleeting quality that relates to fame and money and fortune, and those things which are like vanity move off and fade away, okay? I forgot to switch this just to give you a sense of scale. It's a very large painting, as you can see. This is Audrey Flack standing next to her painting, obviously, okay? But to return to my historical presentation, we come to Marie-Louise Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun in the 18th century. She was a friend of Marie Antoinette, and she obviously did a lot of commissioned portraits of the noble men and noble women of the period. It is discussed and shown, for instance, in this really lovely portrait that is, in a way, if you look at this young woman, okay, and begin to really break down some of her physicality, she is not as attractive as the painting presents her. You know, her eyes are a little bit too far apart, and her nose is a little bit too long, okay? But yet the painting exudes a sense of beauty within it. The use of the color, the play of the hair, the softness with which the light illuminates the image. Or for instance here, this perhaps a more romantic presentation where this young woman looks up and away and off to the side, okay? Or here, okay? Two self-portraits. For instance, here on the left, once again, she is presenting us with her as a working artist. Palette, brushes, easel, she turns and greets us. It's almost as if we had entered the studio, just stopped at the door. Her mouth is slightly open as she tends to greet us. One of the things that I will say that always kind of like throws me a little bit about these self-portraits is they're always dressed so well. And most artists I know don't dress well when they go into the studio, okay? So there might be a little bit dressing up here, okay? Not to take away from the painting, but it's just sort of a curiosity in a sense. And here, for instance, on the right, this is a self-portrait with her daughter, Julia. A nice sense of intimacy, a nice sense of domesticity, a nice sense of bonding. The two are one. And we know, historically, she was incredibly close to her daughter. And that, of course, is illustrated so marvelously in this painting by her. And when we come to the late 19th, just at the turn into the 20th century, we come to a painter by the name of Eva Gonzalez. We do not have a lot of paintings by her, I'm sorry to say, because she died in her 30s. And she was right at the cutting edge. She was in the sense that she was a student of Edouard Manet. And of course, Manet was interested in painting modern life. And of course, that is the image that we see here by Eva Gonzalez. A young woman and a gentleman at the theater. She turns and is distracted. She has her opera glasses in her hand. And, excuse me. And, but you will notice that the painting is dark, which is very parallel to that of the paintings of Edouard Manet, okay? Here we have Mary Cassatt, American painter who was part of the Impressionist movement, and the focus of her imagery is mother and child, and essentially female. And one of the reasons for that is that she did not have access to the nude model. She nor other women of the period. They weren't allowed. It wasn't possible. Women of this period who traveled from location to location needed to have a chaperone. Men could go to the Louvre and set up a little easel and paint from the masters. Women could go to the Louvre and take their easel and their canvas and a chaperone. One could not move around very quickly or very easily. Here, for instance, we see that sense of bonding. Notice, for instance, one of the few male images that Mary Cassatt produced, where the man and the boy are joined together in one in this very large, dark shape. Or here, this really is the Earth Mother, okay, reaching out to the tree of knowledge. to share and lead it for her child, okay? And when I come to the 20th century, very quickly here, I come to a photographer by the name of Tina Modatti. She was born in Italy and immigrated to the United States when she was 16 years of age with her family. They moved to San Francisco. Interestingly enough, she was doing photographs of flowers before Georgia O'Keeffe began to do her well-known flower paintings. And O'Keeffe may have been familiar with her photographs because O'Keeffe dealt in photographs. And O'Keeffe and Stieglitz were married, obviously. She, interestingly enough, started to make a career as a Hollywood starlet. She made a number of movies and appeared on the silver screen, but she eventually left that. She met Edward Weston, who was the one who taught her photography, and they went off on a liaison to Mexico where she stayed. In the early aspects of her photography, as you can see her here, she had a very formal point of view. There is a sense of abstraction and formality looking down the stairway or through the doors. But here, of course, she gets slowly tied into the political and social movement of Mexico at the time. And obviously here with the bandolier and the ear of corn and the sickle, we are talking about socialism, we are talking about communism. And here, for instance, on the left as well, the hands of a working individual. And so when we come to these photographs by Tina Modatti, notice, for instance, here on the right, a young woman with the flag. It almost screams liberté, fighting the barricades for the good of the people. And this, obviously, here, her photograph of the peasants marching in protest. With this type of shot, it lacks composition. One is not more important than the other. There is a sense of equality. In many respects, this is like a precursor to a Jackson Pollock painting, where there is, again, that sense of overall composition. But obviously here, there is a social commentary which is very important to her. And here we come to Georgia O'Keeffe, who is known for her flower paintings. And there is a lot of discussion about the sexuality of them. I would suggest, particularly on the left, the red cannas certainly look like the vagina or vulva area. I don't think there's any question about that. But when she gets to New Mexico and she begins to paint the landscape is essentially Mother Earth. And when we have these vertical paintings, notice again here, the sense of opening here. Again, it almost has to do with the aspect of the vulva, the entering into Mother Earth. And in terms of other landscape paintings that she has, it's almost as if we're seeing a piece of a reclining figure. That this is a leg torso aspect. Or again, it has that sense within this situation. Or here, notice again, the way this moves through. It's very organic, it's very alive. It is the Mother Earth. It is almost part of a figure study. Thanks.